Cheo Hodari Coker. Please give him a round of applause.
How you guys doing tonight? Well, I kind of feel bad because since everyone's seen everything, I'm like, to even come out and watch it again, thank you so much. This thing, it's just like, it was such a special opportunity to even be considered to write and produce this show, and then to do it, and then at the same time to work with, Mike Colter and Simone Missick and Alfre Woodard and Mahershala and the cast, and then at the same time, the writers that I was able to work with, like Charles Murray, Kayla Cooper, Ida Kroll, Christian Taylor, Jason Horwich, Matt Owens and Nathan Jackson. And Ida Kroll, of course. But the thing was that we all kind of came together, and across the board, it was a labor of love. And that's the thing that's been the most special about sharing this show, is that you see every bit of love, every bit of that love on the screen. Because the one thing that I've learned is that a script, it's important, yes, to tell a good story, but at the same time, when you have a story that everybody believes in, it isn't just about pulling together 200 people in a crew to know what's shooting on what day. When you have a script and a story that people believe in, everybody pulls in, everybody gives 100%. And I think that's the thing that really is resonating about the show, is that, we knew that it meant something to have a black hero, and particularly in these times. And particularly after the 9th, particularly in these times. So I really hope that as first viewing for some of you, second viewing or third or fourth, hopefully, for you guys, that you still find that the show resonates. And as a winner of an Image Award for Southland, I hope, keep my fingers crossed, that.
So please welcome the showrunner, writer, Cheo Hodari Coker. We're going to have a nice, interesting conversation about some things you have seen. We're going to try not to spoil the rest of the series for those who have not seen it. But one thing that we want to do before we get started, if you've seen the entire series, you know that music is an integral part of this series. And one of the performers, the last performer in the series, was Miss Sharon Jones. And as you know, she recently passed away. So we just wanted to have a moment of silence for Miss Sharon Jones. All right. Thank you. Thank you. So.
And thank you for that, because that scene with Sharon Jones at the end really solidifies the series, and she was so wonderful that night, and she had such a really great time making the show. So, her death and her passing is really definitely very poignant.
Well, since we're on music, we might as well start there, because music is definitely leaves a theme throughout this entire series. Maybe you can tell us a little bit how you wove not only all the different genres, but how music played a part in making this.
Well, the thing for me is just, just growing up with music and being around music just my whole life, and just even this thing as a kid about just like my mom and my uncle's record collections, and everything from Songs in the Key of Life to Mahalia Jackson's records to John Lee. All the stuff. Half the stuff we use in the show is just from memories. For me, I wanted the show to feel different. I wanted Harlem to be a real place. I wanted, just to show, any aspect of African American life. Music has always been a very important part of that, of reflecting all the various, moments and cultures. So yes, hip hop was definitely probably the propellant force for the show, but at the same time, I wanted to show where hip hop came from. I wanted to show just the entire spectrum of black music. Like as a kid growing up on the East Coast, I'm from Connecticut, but when I visit my cousins in Jersey and in New York, I remember Frankie Crocker, his radio show on BLS. And I remember that, the theme song for that show was Moody's Mood for Love. And the thing about Frankie Crocker's show that was so different was that he would not only play contemporary R&B, but he'd play anything. He'd play Jimi Hendrix next to Parliament Funkadelic, next to Coleman Hawkins. And so that was one of the things that I felt was really important to the show, was to really just show, like, that black music isn't one myopic thing. I mean, it's many things, actually.
All right. Well, we've heard you describe this series as a standard Western motif, entrenched in a hip-hop tradition and wrapped in a superhero cape.
Okay.
You got to explain that.
Well, the thing about a Western is, like, you have the mysterious man with no name who comes in to town, and he usually has a friend that's been in the town for a long time that says, hey, things are bad here, we could use your help. And he's like, nah, I've gone through some stuff and I don't really feel like getting involved. At some point something happens, and usually the person doing that is the person that owns the saloon where all the badness happens. At some point there's someone involved, either a woman who's been wronged or a woman who's trying to change things, that is attracted to the main character. There's a showdown, in the main road, usually where the saloon is involved. And so all those things, but instead of doing that, we had Lenox Avenue, we have Harlem's Paradise, which is kind of an amalgam of everything from the Cotton Club to, Will Small's Paradise to the Lenox Lounge, and, various, Harlem establishments throughout the years. Luke is kind of our man with no name, so that's why we definitely said Western. But then, of course, you have superhero elements because of the superpowers. And so that was the thing, was Unforgiven was just as much of an influence on this as Shaft. So, I kind of wanted to show that you can do both.
All right, and so he did. This was Netflix's most successful Marvel series this year.
Nice.
That's incredible.
Well, that's entirely thanks to you guys, and really thanks to really. I think the thing was that I wanted to really do a show that would appeal to everybody, but at the same time, like Queen Sugar and like Atlanta and like Insecure, and really this kind of wave of shows have proven that, in doing a show that's unadulteratedly, black, that in a way that's almost the best way to reach everybody, because what it is like, I think if you look at previous shows that, or even previous movies that have dealt with our experiences, there've always been some kind of filter, as opposed to just telling a story. Telling a story that's really true to our culture and really true to a lot of different things. And we've gotten to the point where the audience, any audience of any color, really wants to see those unfiltered, unadulterated stories. And so it's really, music's done that for a while. I mean, of course, Please Hammer Don't Hurt 'Em, comes out, and that's kind of what quote-unquote pop hip-hop had to be. And then once The Chronic came out, after that, you can do anything. And so, but movies had never really been that unfiltered. So with this, I kind of wanted to prove the same thing, that, we could really tell a story that is what I call inclusively black, from the standpoint of, that was the thing about just even the language and everything else, was that I wanted to kind of think about how you could tell a story without worrying about another audience. Much the same way how, like, when Woody Allen made, Manhattan or Annie Hall, he wasn't really thinking about anybody that wasn't, in Upper Manhattan, I mean, like, on the west side or of Manhattan, or even Scorsese, like, in terms of a movie like Goodfellas or Mean Streets, or even, well, of course, probably my biggest influence, Spike Lee, in terms of, all the various Brooklyn movies that he's made. That's the thing, was that it's possible to do these stories in a way that, I think is universal without really pulling punches.
So when you make a story this way, and you talked about the language, there's always so much controversy around the use of the N-word.
Mm-hmm.
How did you attack it? And what are you getting back from the way that you portrayed it?
Well, I mean, that word, as we know, has, it should only have one meaning, and it should be negative. But the thing is that our community over the years has had various reactions. So, perfect example, my grandfather was a Tuskegee Airman. He flew for the 100th Fighter Squadron. And he only has one reaction to that. I mean, he's passed away, but he only had one reaction to that word, which is negative. Then, the next generation, which would include my mother, my aunt, and uncles, who were part of the movement. By the time, H. Rap Brown and other people kind of flipped the meaning of that word at some context had a revolutionary kind of, thing where it wasn't necessarily negative. And then, of course, some of the music that came out of that time, like The Last Poets, that's kind of where you kind of heard the use of that word in a different way. And then, of course, the humor of Richard Pryor, Dick Gregory. Then what happened in the 80s is, people kind of cut the afros to kind of a business size. And, you think about the Cosby Show. And, basically what happened with my hip-hop generation is that we went into our parents' closets and found the Daishikis, found the Malcolm X records, found the Last Poets, found the Richard Pryor records. By that time he was making, Moving instead of, Which Way Is Up or some of the other stuff he was doing. And so we kind of reintroduced that word in music. And then I think the thing about hip-hop is hip-hop I've always kind of considered as a private conversation between two black people, like, broadcast throughout the world. So in terms of doing that, I don't think that people necessarily thought about the impact of that word. So that word becomes a part of the popular culture when the music takes off. Then all of a sudden you're hearing the music everywhere. You're hearing the word everywhere. And I think for this newer generation, it doesn't necessarily have the same sting or the same meaning. And so the thing is that every single character in this show has a different reaction to the word, much as our community does. But the thing that was interesting to me was that people were kind of saying, okay, well, because Luke doesn't like that word, he's conservative. But my whole thing is like, Chuck D doesn't necessarily like that word either, or KRS-One or Rakim, but you don't think that they're conservative. I mean, come on, I'm trying to make Big Daddy King, not Herman King. And so my thing was honestly that, we're not one thing. And then at the same time, particularly after this election, where there's hate crimes all over the place and, people are getting real bold, in ways they haven't been in a long time. I wanted, in some ways, this show and the things that we're dealing with over the course of 13 episodes are even more relevant than they were before,
All right. I know for people who may not know that the Luke Cage character was based on the comic from the blaxploitation era.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of those overtones are throughout the series, but you were able to turn that into including what the current political environment was. For you who don't know, the Luke Cage character was set in the blaxploitation era. The original character was around a lot of things that were going on during blaxploitation, and so those overtones are included in the series. How did you turn and include not only what was going on at the time with the character, because he does have an older feel, but then you turn it and bring in current political environments and things that are actually happening, like in the first episode you talked about Fox News, which we all know about Fox News, and then as you go on, we won't talk about the spoilers, but there are things that go on with the hoodies, and there are things that go on, conversations. How did you include those, and what was your thought process in making sure that those were relevant?
Well, I mean, I think blaxploitation to a certain extent has always gotten a bad rap. And the thing about blaxploitation, honestly, what it was, when Melvin Van Peebles did Sweet Sweetback, when Gordon Parks Jr. did Superfly, when Gordon Parks Sr. did Shaft, it was just the opportunity to give black actors the same, hero shots that, Lee Marvin, Sean Connery, anybody else, any white stars had. And so that's even like why, for example, like you have the dominant theme music, because if you look at James Bond, James Bond has a theme. That's why Shaft had a theme. And in fact, actually, the Shaft poster said "hotter than Bond, cooler than Bullet," and so that's kind of, that's kind of the thing, was that it was always kind of, in the beginning, that was what it was about. I mean, of course, it goes off in all the different directions, but I mean, I think that's the thing, was that in much the same way with this, I wanted Luke Cage, particularly in translating it from the comic book, to be a black superhero as opposed to a superhero that happened to be black. And so that's the thing, is like, watching bullets bounce off of Superman is one thing, but, when you have bullets bounce off a black man in a hoodie, I don't even think we anticipated how it would resonate when we did it. It wasn't that we were always thinking about the history, but by incorporating our history as a part of, almost as a third or fourth special effect, what happened is that it just kind of resonated throughout the show. And so it came to be something that, allowed us to, really make Harlem a real place, and at the same time, think about the politics in a way that was engaging but didn't really feel preachy. I mean, because that's the thing, is that so much history now is gleaned through television shows, through movies, that one of the kind of the effects that I don't think we necessarily anticipated from the show is that all of a sudden people are like actually looking up the books that they're seeing. It's been reincorporating, different people, like, I mean, just in terms of from our history, so that's really in some ways been the most exciting thing, is that, while people have been rewatching the series, they're seeing all these different Easter eggs.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to see that, because you don't think that Marvel is a series. Marvel is an institution of its own, just like any other organization. And then now you've incorporated all of these African American authors. You've incorporated, as you said, your grandfather was a Tuskegee Airman. You incorporated those stories. How did you think about this as Marvel is a series? It's its own institution. As you start to write, how do you plan on including all of those things to make sure that they are present and preserving the Marvel legacy?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, probably some of it was a little subversive, but then at the same time, it's like, I definitely applaud both Marvel and Netflix for giving us the opportunity to tell the story, and never being a question of, oh, you can't say that or you can't do that. That to me was one of the things that was probably one of the best parts. I mean, really doing the entire project was a dream, but for me, one of the best parts was the fact that we were able to kind of, go places culturally, but then at the same time not lose, sight of the fact that it's a superhero story. I mean, even in terms of the pacing of the first two episodes, yes, the first two episodes are kind of slow, but they build a world, and then as you move on in the series, for if you haven't seen, the other 11 episodes, not only does the series get faster paced, you actually, begin to kind of see different things, and you also, we get to see Luke use his powers more, and at the same time, there's different showdowns with him and Cottonmouth, and then of course Diamondback shows up. I mean, depending on how many people have seen the whole thing, I mean, part of me wants to talk about the entire thing, but the other part of me doesn't want to spoil it. So if this is your first experience with it.
Yeah, we're trying not to do the spoilers, but he has the best villains ever. Best villains ever. We're going to take a few questions, because, I could sit up here and conversate all day. Does anybody have any questions? Gentleman right there.
Was everything shot in Harlem, or you had different locations?
We shot all over New York City. Our standing sets were actually in Brooklyn, but for example, the barbershop actually, where Denzel is sitting with his brothers, and then he kind of comes out of the diner, sees Idris Elba on the street, shoots him, and then goes and sits back down. That's the building. The upstairs part was where they shot that, and actually that stretch of Lenox Avenue was really the same thing. Even one of the more funny bits of trivia is that the cast that you see in the movie actually is Peter Gelfman, who was our prop master. He actually also did props on American Gangster, so that's actually the same cast that Denzel had in the movie. We use that too, so I always thought that was kind of like a funny thing. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely the thing was, I felt it was very important that if we were going to talk about Harlem all the time, that we'd actually see Harlem. So one of the great things about the show was that we got to really kind of film all over Harlem, but then at the same time, we really made New York feel like New York.
Okay, we had one down front, and then we'll go back to that.
Cheo, quick question. Luke Cage, what makes him cooler than the other superheroes?
Well, I mean, he's a brother that's bulletproof and, looks just as good as in a suit as he does in a t-shirt. The thing about Mike Colter is that he has a very kind of quiet, smooth, definitive swagger. And so that's the thing is, like, I mean, I tried. It's impossible to take a bad photograph of that brother. I tried. It's like he's backlit everywhere you see him. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like it just kind of made things easy to a certain extent.
He had a good answer, because I would have said he's black. That gentleman on the right.
How familiar were you with the material before you landed this job?
Well, very very familiar. I mean, because I'm a kind of every Wednesday at the comic book shop kind of collector. I mean, I've been collecting since once I was maybe 10, 11 years old. I'm 43. So I've been reading various stories for a long time, not just Luke Cage and Iron Fist, and of course Heroes for Hire, and Power Man and Iron Fist, but also like I was always a huge X-Men fan, X-Men and Wolverine. Always more Marvel than DC, but the thing is that I definitely knew the opportunity that was given in doing the show. So just as a geek, I mean, that first meeting, I was completely geeking out going to Marvel and trying to kind of like maintain a certain level of cool. But it was that, I'm a lifelong geek, so that didn't last very long.
Young lady straight ahead.
Hi, how are you? I love the show. I just moved here from Brooklyn, so seeing all the different New York stuff. But I just want to ask you about not giving anything away, but I don't know if you received flack for the woman that he chose to be with, because I was thinking she was gonna be so black, just because the show is so black. But then the person you chose for him, I just.
What you mean in terms of Claire Temple?
No, I'm talking about Rosario Dawson.
Yeah,
the
character Claire Temple.
Her being the woman of choice. I was wondering why she wasn't like a soul sister,
fair question. I mean, the
dark
thing.
skin, so yeah.
The thing.
What was the choice of
Have you seen the entire show?
Yeah.
Okay, because the one thing about the show is, the show is definitely not color struck. I mean, the thing that was important for me was that we showed the entire spectrum of black beauty. And the fact that there's so many sisters basically featured throughout the show in various roles. I felt that was also important. Also, it was important to have definitely strong portrayals, whether it's Alfre's, characters, Mariah, or what Simone Missick does incredibly with Misty Knight. In terms of the love interest, when you look at the comic book, Claire Temple and Rosario Dawson, I think is incredible in the series. She was already cast in Daredevil, so it wasn't a question of changing that. We took from the comics in that character that was introduced in Daredevil has always traditionally been a love interest of Luke Cage. And so the thing was that we wanted to kind of bend things in terms of having this interesting moment with Misty Knight. So it's kind of like The Fugitive from the standpoint of, okay, what if Harrison Ford and Tommy Lee Jones met in a bar? And from the standpoint of there's a connection, and then all of a sudden it changes because of them being on different sides of the law. The thing in terms of Luke's choice, that was something that happened character-wise and evolution-wise. It wasn't a question of, let's not have him with a sister and let's denigrate it. It was a question of honestly being true to the comics, and then at the same time, building something different, because I think Luke's a complicated man that's got as you see, is kind of all over the place. So it wasn't a question of picking one over the other. And then if we want to really get into it, I mean, if you look at Jessica Jones, I mean, if we're going to go into the politics, at least if you want to say that, he's going in a different, or if I guess from your standpoint, the right direction. So, I mean, that's kind of was the viewpoint. It wasn't necessarily a question of him choosing one over the other. And not to mention the fact that Rosario identifies as an Afro-Latina. She doesn't, again, the diaspora.
All right, we're going to take this gentleman here and the young lady in the back.
Are there plans for a Misty Knight spinoff? And if so, would you be producing it or involved with it?
Well, I mean, I don't know anything. The one thing I can confirm is that, Simone Missick's portrayal of Misty Knight is incredible, and it's been really one of the highlights of the series.
Okay, the young lady straight back.
Sure.
You gotta speak up.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
What themes are you trying to bring to the audience's forefront that aren't familiar with Black culture? And also, where did you get the theme of going forward? That was very exciting.
Well, the theme to go forward kind of comes from Frederick Douglass. Without struggle, there is no progress. And so it's kind of like our variation on that. In terms of actual themes for the series, I mean, it's really shows the evolution of a hero. basically from someone who doesn't want to be a hero, who finally, towards the middle or the end, realizes that he's needed and it's really what he's meant to do. One of the things that I felt was really important is the fact that there's never been a black man that stepped forward that has done so without sacrifice. Whether it's Medgar Evers, whether it's Malcolm X, whether it's Martin Luther King, whether it's Nelson Mandela. And I felt that it was important that in showing a black hero, that there has to be a certain sense of loss, but then at the same time, he does so despite what it's going to cost him. And that's one of the things that, if we're lucky enough to get the opportunity to tell more stories, that we'll explore further. Fingers crossed that we get a pickup for a second season.
Oh, it's happening.
Oh, it's happening. We'll take this gentleman here, and then we have one last question of the gentleman with the hat in the back.
Okay.
And then that's it.
Are you going to incorporate the show into any other Marvel Netflix shows like Iron Fist?
Well...
Repeat the question.
He said, is he going to incorporate this show into any other Marvel shows like Iron Fist?
Iron Fist just stopped filming, and so hopefully I'll get to see a couple episodes and see what happens with it. But the one thing that is happening right now that has been announced, so Marvel doesn't kill me, is The Defenders. And The Defenders is going to include Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Misty Knight, Iron Fist, and Daredevil. So,
Gentleman in the back with the hat. Last question.
My question, if you're going to be working on The Defenders or start writing or planning anything for Luke Cage season 2?
Well, they have to order season 2 first. So I'm, like everybody else, I'm not even being coy. I really hope they order it because I can't wait to get back to work. In terms of The Defenders, that's filming right now, and so I'm looking forward to seeing that too.
Okay, we have one more person that was begging, one in our nominees section. So,
all right, last question. I just like the stereotype, because there's a stereotype about Asians, because what you did in your show, you had the Asian couple, the shop owner. And stereotype, there's always this thing about Asians being filmed, they gotta have the Asian accent. But what you did was they were actually speaking well, and they even mentioned it that we've been in this country, we don't have an accent. So was it something that you guys set and talk about it and planned it, or it just happened like that?
Well, it was interesting. It was like on set. When Jade Wu, who plays Genghis Khan and Clem, when they first were reading. The thing that Paul McGagan, Charles Murray, and myself said was, speak how you speak. Speak your truth. Don't necessarily, because at first they were asking, like, do you want us to use an accent? I said, no, just speak normal, And so I don't think we anticipated how the audience was really going to appreciate that as much as it was. And so that was actually one of the great things about kind of reading online reactions, giving you that scene, and people of all color, but particularly Asian American groups being really happy about that portrayal. I think it's really important, honestly, that everybody kind of get the chance to be themselves, no matter how they're portrayed. Actually, the most interesting commentary were, honestly, there were various white fans that were freaking out about the fact that there weren't, a lot of white people in the show. And I kind of found that interesting because I'm like, damn, it's like when Girls and Friends and a bunch of other shows that actually I liked came out, and my first reaction wasn't, where are we? Because unfortunately, we've always been used to not being a part of the conversation. And so it was interesting in terms of telling a black story in an honest way, that there were some people out there that were thinking like, okay, like, where are we? And then they had to come to realize, wait a minute, we're telling a story. And, just the best stories, it doesn't really matter what the culture you're from. If the storytelling is interesting, you'll get into it. Like, one of my favorite movies is Trainspotting. And I don't know anything about heroin or Scotland, but like you get into the story and it's cool. Same thing with like City of God, or even the various movies where that just kind of throw you in the deep end of the pool, and then you just float, and then you stop thrashing, you just kind of float along. And so I was kind of the same thing with this. It's like there are going to be some people that haven't had this blacking experience, but it's just like anything else. You come to the party, after a while you just jam.
well, let's give him a round of applause for such a wonderful party. If you haven't seen it, make sure you go on Netflix and finish watching the entire season. It's there, it's wonderful, and we appreciate you for being with us this evening.
Thank you for coming out. Thanks for coming out. Good night.
Thank you.